Speaking of Jesus, we're talking about Jesus this episode, Jeremy.
Are we?
You must love this. Yeah.
Woo!
Verse 25. Let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. It's talking about Jesus' return, as I understand it. And so, of course, this made me think of Matthew 16:28, where Jesus says, I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So this statement of Jesus, when he's talking to his disciples and saying, I'm coming back soon. In fact, so soon it's going to be within your lifetime, or at least one of you will still be alive before I come back. It's a very theologically problematic statement. It's led to all kinds of speculation and Zionism, and books have been written that are called the Left Behind series about end time stuff.
You can't keep referencing Left Behind. You got one per episode. You spent it. You've used it. Move on.
Are you breaking up the tribulation force? Oh my gosh. We just started. So anyway, so for me, like I said earlier, I like Jesus. I like Jesus' teachings. I think like the Sermon on the Mount is this beautiful like picture of morality that I can totally get behind. But this is a statement of Jesus that I've never been able to make sense of. And I've heard all kinds of explanations for what does this mean? I remember when I was a Christian, I was like, yeah, this is a problem, but the explanation is 1,000 years or like a day to the God. So that's why when Jesus is coming, he's coming back soon. It's like not that soon to us. But if Jesus said this and it's not literally true, does that make him a false prophet? That's where I think, that's where my mind goes now. Does that mean like we can't trust everything he says if this didn't come true? What's your take on this idea of Jesus is coming back soon? The end is nigh.
So this is a question I've heard, a lot of people, and even I think I've heard like in, theology books I've read, people talk about, there were things Jesus was wrong about, which I personally am not comfortable with that line of thought. But, they would point to verses like this, like, yeah, Jesus thought it was happening soon. He was wrong. So there are people that would have just a very straightforward reading of that. First off, I want to say, I think every generation of Christian wants to believe Jesus is coming back soon. So I think we got to start there. There's an inherent end times bias built into us. It's like, if I'm a Christian, great, Jesus is going to be in my lifetime. And I don't know. That doesn't answer the question. I just think there's something funny to that of like, how do we all believe it's going to be in our lifetime? And maybe that's what you should believe. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I had that. I had the rapture anxiety. No joke. True story about me. I remember being a little kid and thinking, I hope Jesus doesn't come back before all the Star Wars movies come out because I want to see them.
So most of the time that argument is used for Christian couples before marriage. I hope God doesn't come back before our wedding night.
Right.
Because I want to try sex, the right way before. That's usually where that argument gets used. So
yeah,
yours wasn't sex. Maybe because you heard about it from Dobson. And so you weren't interested in it. You were more interested in Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly.
How's that for a callback? Woo! Beautiful. Let's answer this question. Okay, so really what we're wrestling with is what does the phrase coming in his kingdom mean? Because that's, to the Matthew passage you read, that's what the phrase says. Now, one interpretation that you just acknowledged is that Jesus is referring to coming back again, which is often, known as like the second coming. I'm just going to say, I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about here. I find that explanation very doubtful for two reasons. One, elsewhere, anytime Jesus talks about coming back, it's always super vague and intentionally to the point of like, stop trying to guess. Like, you're not going to know. I don't know. And so that's where you see that, like, that's the context that you find elsewhere. So I find it would be, I think, misleading that suddenly he's very specific this one time when all the other examples, he's like, it's going to be a thief in the night. No one's going to know. But, now I'm going to tell you, you're going to be alive. You're going to be alive. You're going to be dead. It's like, that would just be very opposite to what Jesus says elsewhere on that. Second, it would mean Jesus was wrong, which theologically I'd have problems with. Like, okay, well then he's not who I think he is if he can just be blatantly wrong on something like that. Okay. So I'm going to say no to that explanation. Now you're going, all right, well, you better replace it with something better. I can feel that coming off you, Jeff. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you two better explanations. And I think you can choose either one of these and be fine. I don't know which one it is, but I would say either one of these I would be fine with and would help me make sense of this. One explanation that I think has merit is that Jesus is referring to the transfiguration here. Now, you might go, what? How can that be the coming? Because that's the very next verses after this. So if you read it as Matthew wrote it, what comes immediately following is the transfiguration in Matthew 17. So, Matthew 16 ends on the verse you read. The very next, they didn't have chapter headings. The very next verse, what was chapter 17, verse 1 for us, is the story of the transfiguration, where, some of the disciples go up on the mountain. They get to see, God, talk to Jesus, and so it's like a whole thing. Now you're going, well, how could that be the coming of the Lord? How could that be the thing? Well, interesting that you asked that, Jeff, because 2 Peter has an interesting verse that would lead to this explanation being significant. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 through 18 say this. For this is Peter talking, like his own experience. We were not making up clever stories when we told you about the powerful coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We saw his majestic splendor with our own eyes when he received honor and glory from God the Father. The voice from the majestic glory of God said to him, "This is my dearly loved Son, who brings me great joy." We ourselves heard that voice from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. Okay, here Peter is directly retelling about the transfiguration. And notice the phrase he uses in verse 16, the powerful coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is almost verbatim the phrase used in Matthew 16:28, the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, right? So I would say that the fact that the transfiguration comes immediately after that verse, and then Peter seems to be connecting that phrase with that story as well, would make that a very plausible explanation for what Jesus was referring to, of this idea of the kingdom coming, where you're going to experience something you have not experienced yet, this supernatural moment, right, where God the Father is essentially acknowledging the Son in front of them, and they're like, whoa. So I would say that's one, to me, very plausible explanation of what Jesus could be referring to. Okay, option one. Option two. Another way to think about this is that Jesus could be referring to the crucifixion and the resurrection. Okay, you're going to see me coming in the kingdom, essentially not literally, Jesus coming or going, but the act of the kingdom, taking place. Now, think about this in light of Hebrews. This one makes a lot of sense, because the resurrection, the crucifixion and the resurrection, is what literally ushers us into the new covenant, right? Before Jesus' death, he had not fulfilled the old covenant. That had to happen through his death, and his resurrection begins a new covenant, a new way of connecting with God through the person of Jesus. So in that sense, it's and most of them got to see that, right? And so in that sense, it's what officially ends the old covenant and begins something new. And so both of these stories, not all of the disciples got to see either one of those, right? So most of them saw either one. So that works. But then I think you can make sense of what does it mean, for God's kingdom to come. It doesn't have to be left behind end times. It could be either one of those. And elsewhere in the New Testament gives us support for those theories. What do you think? Am I out to lunch, or that makes sense?
I gotta hand it to you. I've not heard either of those explanations before. I thought way to go. Points for originality. Partial credit. I like those. They I thought for sure one of the things you were going to say was the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Yeah, you didn't even go for that. So I think those can explain Matthew 16. So then back to Hebrews 10:25 then. What's their understanding of the kingdom is coming soon, right? Because when Hebrews is being written, this is post transubstantiation, post-transfiguration, post-resurrection.
We're back in the blood last week.
Yeah, sorry. Post-transfiguration, post-resurrection, but they're still saying like Jesus is coming back soon. And you see this in many of the New Testament epistles. So what's their view there then?
So I would say that goes back to every generation thinks Jesus is coming back. I think that's what you see there is them believing that it is drawing near, trying to create a sense of urgency. And I think, probably for them, I would give them a little grace. They got to see, all this stuff happen in their life. So they did probably think this would also happen, like, yeah, like we saw him die and come back to life. So we'll probably see him come back too. Like from their point of view, that probably made sense of like, well, yeah, why would it be thousands of years after this? Like we've, I don't know. I think like almost like you could see from their point of view, like that would probably be what your default would be. But I also think there's a way of just kind of creating urgency, which I would say a lot of Christians do this of like, hey, you better be ready.
Right.
Jesus is coming. We don't know. It's not a prediction. It's just saying it's, technically every day that passes, it's more near than it was. Right. So like logically, sure. But I think it's kind of like a literary device to get people to be focused on it or thinking about it. And I think you see the writers probably are very much in that camp.
Yeah. And of course you could always say within the span of human history or the span of the universe, it's a very short amount of time, like we've talked about before. But just between you and me, Jeremy, when's he coming back? Do you have a date?
Like a thief in the night.
Okay, you didn't take the bait there. That's good.
Not my first rodeo, Jeff.
Many people have made predictions, and all of them have been wrong so far. And
I made the news one time. This is a fun fact. I made the news. I don't even remember. It was one of the, probably 10 years ago. I don't know. One of the latest, there's some comet or meteor or something in the sky. And there was this prophet, and everybody was talking about it because he was predicting like, this is it. And I wrote this blog post and I'm like, here's how it's not it. Basically it was like, here's all the things that Jesus said about it. So yeah, I think it was Harold Camping. That's the name that's come into my mind.
Okay.
So I'd have to fact check this. But off the top of my head, it was Harold Camping. And I think it was
that someone who bought billboards and stuff like that? Or
I'm trying to remember. I think it was a whole, I'm guessing it was like a cult thing. Okay. I don't remember.
Yeah.
This has been a bit and it's not in my notes. So I wasn't prepared for this.
Yeah.
But I just remember I wrote this thing and I think it was like why Harold Camping is wrong or something. And all this, and I made the news. They read my blog, part of my blog on our local news of hey, one pastor is calling his bluff saying da 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 da.
Hey, that's awesome. Calling out the prophets.
Calling out the false prophets. What I do.
Speaking truth to power. Yeah.